I spent 40 years working, saving every penny for my son, Mark. For his wedding, I gave him the last of my life savings. I wanted him to have the perfect day. But the real gift, I thought, was the one I made with my own hands, my final piece of love for him. And then during the toast, in front of all his new wealthy friends and family, he pointed to his mother-in-law and told everyone she was the mother who had made him the man he was. They thought they had broken me. They thought they could simply erase me. They had no idea that the old-fashioned skills they mocked were about to build me a new life they could only dream of. My whole life, my hands have told my story. They are not soft, elegant hands. They are the hands of a worker, a mother, a survivor. For 40 years, they measured, cut, and stitched, turning simple cloth into markers of life's biggest moments. Christening gowns, prom dresses, and once a simple but beautiful wedding dress for a neighbor who couldn't afford one from a store. These hands built my home and raised my son. And for the past 6 months, these hands had been working on one last masterpiece, a waistcoat for my son, Mark. It was made of deep charcoal wool, so fine it felt like water running through your fingers. The lining was silk, the color of a stormy sky, and on the inside, just over the heart, I had embroidered his initials and the date of his wedding. Every stitch was a memory, a prayer for his happiness. I had raised Mark on my own, and every sacrifice was repaid 1,000 times over just by seeing him happy. When he met Nora, I was thrilled for him. She was beautiful, ambitious, from a family with money and status I could only ever dream of. They seemed to be building a perfect life, and I was proud to contribute what I could. My savings account, the result of decades of careful living, was now nearly empty. But it was for Mark. It was all for Mark. The day they came over, just a week before the wedding, the waistcoat was finally ready. I had it laid out on my sewing table, wrapped in tissue paper. When the doorbell rang, my heartbeat quickened with excitement. I couldn't wait to see his face. Mark came in first, giving me a hug that still felt like home. Nora followed, her smile perfect and her eyes scanning my small, tidy living room as if she were inspecting it. She was always polite, but there was a coolness there, a distance I could never quite cross. After a few minutes of small talk, I couldn't wait any longer. I told them I had something for Mark, a little wedding surprise. I brought out the carefully wrapped package and handed it to him. He unwrapped it carefully, his brow furrowed in curiosity. When he lifted the waistcoat from the tissue paper, his eyes widened. "Mom," he breathed out, "this is incredible. Did you make this?" He held it up, admiring the clean lines and the perfect stitching. He ran his hand over the soft wool, a genuine, happy smile spreading across his face. That smile was everything. It was the reason for all of it. Then Nora stepped forward. "Oh, Alice," she said, her voice light and airy. "How charming! You're so talented with your little hobbies." The word stung. Hobby. 40 years of professional work, keeping a roof over our heads with a needle and thread, reduced to a little hobby. Mark's smile faltered as he glanced at her. Nora didn't seem to notice. She walked over to her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a sleek white box with the name of a famous designer printed in silver. She opened it to reveal a waistcoat that was, I had to admit, very stylish. It was a pale, trendy gray made of a shiny modern fabric. "My mother and I found this last week," Nora announced. "It's from the designer's new collection. It perfectly matches the color palette for the wedding party. We thought it would be best if everything was cohesive, for the aesthetic." She said the word aesthetic as if it were the most important thing in the world. Mark looked from the designer vest back to the one in his hands, the one I had poured my soul into. I could see the battle in his eyes, the love for me and the fear of disappointing her. "It's beautiful, Mom, really," he said, his voice quiet. He wouldn't look at me. "But Nora and her mom have put so much work into planning the look of the day. Maybe it's best if I stick to their plan." The way he looked away, unable to meet my eyes, was the moment I felt the first real crack form in my heart. He folded my waistcoat, my gift, and placed it back in the tissue paper as if it were a fragile, ancient thing that no longer belonged in the modern world. And before I tell you what Nora said next, a small, smiling comment that was meant to sound kind but felt sharper than any needle, I'd love it if you could take a moment to subscribe. Your support means the world, and you won't want to miss the moment I discovered what their plan for me really was. I took the box from him, my hands steady, my face a polite, neutral mask that I had perfected over a lifetime. I couldn't let them see how deeply they had cut me. I simply nodded and said, "Of course, dear. We want everything to be perfect for your big day." Nora's smile widened. She had won. She glided over to the wedding planner on my coffee table and started talking about floral arrangements. As if the last 5 minutes had never happened. As if my heart wasn't lying in pieces in a cardboard box on my own sewing table. They didn't stay long after that. As I walked them to the door, Nora turned to me. "Don't you worry about a thing, Alice," she said, patting my arm. "We have everything under control. We even have the perfect seat for you at the ceremony. You'll be so comfortable." There was something in the way she said it. The perfect seat. It sounded less like a promise and more like a warning. I watched them get into their sleek, expensive car and drive away. A cold dread began to creep into my chest, quieting the pain and replacing it with a sense of unease. I looked at the box holding the rejected waistcoat and had a terrible feeling. This wasn't just about a piece of clothing. It was about something much bigger, and it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, a quiet chill settled over my house. I had carefully folded the waistcoat and placed it in a cedar chest at the foot of my bed, along with my own wedding dress and Mark's baby blanket. It felt like I was putting a part of my hope to rest, storing it away with things from a time that had already passed. I tried to push the incident from my mind. I told myself that weddings make people tense, that Nora was just trying to create her perfect day, and I was being too sensitive. A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional, I reminded myself. It bends, it stretches, it forgives. So I decided to bend. A few days before the ceremony, I called Mark to ask about the final details for the rehearsal dinner. I wanted to sound cheerful to show them I wasn't holding on to any resentment. When I asked him what time I should be there was a brief telling pause on his end of the line. "Oh, the rehearsal dinner," he said, his voice suddenly a little too fast. "Right, that's tomorrow night at 7. But hey, I forgot to tell you. We had a small dinner last night with Nora's parents." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. "Oh," I said, keeping my own voice light. "That sounds nice. Was it for the wedding?" "Sort of," he said evasively. "It was really last minute. Catherine, Nora's mom, just threw it together at the country club. It was just, a quiet little thing to welcome her side of the family to town. A quiet little thing. But I was his mother, his only family. The message was not quiet at all. It was loud and clear. I wasn't part of the real family. I was someone to be managed, to be seated at the official events, but not to be included in the inner circle. I didn't belong at the country club. "Well, that sounds lovely, dear," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I'm sure it was a beautiful evening. I didn't want him to hear the hurt, to give him a reason to call me difficult. I decided to stretch, to be the bigger person. The next day he called me. His tone was the one I knew all too well. It was the cheerful, buttering-me-up voice he used when he was about to ask for something. He asked about my garden. He told a funny story about their dog. He did everything but get to the point. Finally, he took a deep breath. "So, Mom, listen. We've hit a little snag with one of the vendors." I knew what was coming. It was always a snag, a last-minute emergency, a bill that was higher than expected. "It's the florist," he said, sounding genuinely stressed. Nora had her heart set on these specific orchids. They have to be flown in from Holland. The supplier just hit us with a last-minute surcharge for customs and shipping. It's $5,000. $5,000 for flowers. Flowers that would be dead in a week. The sum was so absurd, so completely disconnected from my reality that I couldn't speak. I thought of the balance in my savings account. The number was just a little over $5,000. It was the last of it. The final thread in the safety net I had spent a lifetime weaving for myself. "Mark," I started, but my voice was barely a whisper. He must have heard the hesitation, because his voice became rushed and pleading. "I know, Mom. I know it's a huge amount, and I am so sorry to ask you. This is the last thing. I swear it. We just can't come up short now. Nora would be devastated. I'll pay you back, I will. Every single penny as soon as we get back from the honeymoon. You know I'm good for it." But I knew he wasn't. The small loans over the years had never been repaid. They were gifts, I told myself. You don't ask for gifts to be returned. I looked around my living room at the comfortable but worn furniture, at the photos of him on the mantelpiece, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, a teenager in an ill-fitting graduation gown. This was the end of 40 years of saving, of saying no to a new coat, of making my coffee at home, of mending clothes instead of buying new ones. All of it was for him. It had always been for him. "Okay, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "Give me the account details. I'll transfer it now." There was a huge sigh of relief on his end. "Oh, thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver. You have no idea. We'll make it up to you. I promise." I didn't answer. I just wrote down the information, went to my small desk, and logged into my bank's website. The balance stared back at me, $54,731. I typed in the amount for the transfer, $5,000. I clicked the button, and just like that, my life savings were gone. Sent to a company that was providing temporary decorations for a party. The call ended soon after. Mark was happy and relieved, showering me with quick "I love you" before hanging up to go tell Nora the good news. I sat at my desk staring at the screen. My savings account now held less than $300. I felt a deep, profound emptiness. It wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling like a resource, a utility, a bank to be drawn from until it was empty. With nothing left to give, I got up and packed my small suitcase for the hotel. I chose a simple navy blue dress that I had made years ago. It was elegant and understated. It would be fine. I would be fine. I had to believe that all of this sacrifice, all of this pain, would be worth it. When I saw my son's face full of joy and love as he started his new life, I still clung to that hope. I had to. It was all I had left. The hotel was perfectly nice, but it was miles away from the main lodge where Nora's family was staying. My room was at the very end of a long, quiet hallway on the ground floor, overlooking a manicured but empty garden. Through the thin walls, I could sometimes hear the faint thumping of music and bursts of laughter from the rehearsal dinner after-party happening up at the main building. They sounded like they were in another world. I was an island. I carefully hung my navy dress, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles. I told myself this was for the best. I wasn't one for late nights and loud parties anyway. I would get a good night's sleep and be fresh for the wedding tomorrow. Tomorrow, all of this awkwardness would melt away. Tomorrow, I would watch my son get married, and everything would be right with the world. I repeated it to myself like a prayer. I tried to read a book I'd brought, but the words just floated on the page. My mind kept drifting to the rejected waistcoat, to the last-minute dinner I wasn't invited to the $5,000 for flowers. Each memory was a small, sharp stone, and I was starting to feel the weight of them in my pockets. Around 11:00, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I assumed it was Mark calling to say goodnight, but when I looked at the screen, it was a number I didn't recognize. I felt a small flicker of annoyance. A wrong number, probably. I almost ignored it, but something made me slide my thumb across the screen to open the message. The first words were, "Mom, all set for tomorrow." I frowned. A simple mistake. Someone had texted their mother and typed a wrong digit. I was about to close it when the rest of the message loaded. My eyes scanned the lines, and the air in the room suddenly turned to ice. The full text read, "Mom, all set for tomorrow. Mark will introduce you during the toast as the mother who truly shaped him. We'll keep his real mom in the background for photos. She's harmless, but it's all about the right image. We can finally cut the financial cord after the honeymoon." I read it once, then twice. My mind struggled to make sense of it. It felt like trying to read a foreign language, but the words were plain English, and they were sinking into my soul like poison. "Mark will introduce you." It was from Nora. It had to be. She was texting her mother, Catherine, but somehow, through some cruel twist of fate, she had sent it to me. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. I held the phone in my shaking hands, the screen glowing with the terrible truth. Keep his real mom in the background. I was a piece of scenery to be managed, an inconvenient reality that interfered with their perfect picture. She's harmless. The word was a slap in the face. It was the ultimate dismissal. I wasn't a person to be respected or loved. I was an object, inert and powerless, harmless. Cut the financial cord, and there it was, the final brutal piece of the puzzle. My life savings, my 40 years of sacrifice had a deadline, the honeymoon. Once the last of my usefulness was wrung out, the cord would be cut. I wasn't a mother. I was a bank, and I had just been declared empty. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had, the relationship I thought was real. The truth was colder and sharper than I could ever have imagined. Before I tell you what I did in that silent, lonely hotel room, and how that single text message changed the course of my life forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Let me know in the comments. It's a comfort to know we are not alone in our stories. The pain was a physical thing. It was a pressure in my chest so intense I thought my heart would simply stop beating. There were no tears. The shock was too deep for that. It was a cold, silent agony that hollowed me out completely. All the little hurts, all the slights I had excused and forgiven came rushing back. But now they were drenched in the sinister light of this new truth. It wasn't carelessness. It was a plan, a strategy. I had been managed, exploited, and prepared for disposal. I stood up and walked to the mirror over the cheap hotel dresser. I stared at my own reflection, at the face of the woman who had given everything she had for her son. The woman with kind eyes and a soft heart. The woman they called harmless. And in that moment, I understood. They were right. The woman they knew, the mother who bent and stretched and forgave, she was harmless. But as I stared into my own eyes, I watched her disappear. The person who was left in her place was someone they hadn't planned for at all. I didn't move from the mirror for a long time. The night was perfectly silent, and the only sound was the frantic, useless beating of my own heart. The shock had frozen me. The pain was so vast, so absolute, that it had no outlet. There were no tears, no screams, just a deep tectonic shift happening somewhere in the foundations of my soul. I spent the night sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the moonlight wash over the empty garden. I didn't try to sleep. Instead, I let my mind work. For the first time, I took emotion out of the equation and looked at the facts of my life. My memory became a ledger book. I saw the deposits I had made year after year, the love, the support, the endless hours of work, the thousands of dollars for his college education, the down payment for his first car, the final clean sweep of my life savings. I saw it all with a clarity that was as sharp and cold as broken glass. And I saw the withdrawals, the constant demands disguised as requests, the emotional blackmail that kept me giving, the slow, steady erosion of my boundaries and my worth. The text message wasn't an insult. It was a final invoice. It was a receipt that proved my account was now empty and my services were no longer required. The realization didn't even hurt anymore. It was just true, the same way the sky is blue and the earth is round. It was a fact, and once you accept a fact, you can begin to act on it. Sometime in the deep, quiet hours before dawn, the decision settled over me. It wasn't a dramatic, angry choice. It was a calm, logical conclusion. I would not go to the wedding. I would not sit in the perfect seat they had chosen for me. I would not stand in the background of their perfect photos. I would not watch my son introduce another woman as his mother. I would not play the part of the harmless old woman, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw her way. The performance was canceled. Once the decision was made, a strange calm washed over me. The pressure in my chest eased. The frantic energy in my veins subsided. I felt quiet. I stood up and walked to the small closet where my navy blue dress was hanging. For a moment, I just looked at it. The dress I had made for a joyous occasion now just looked like a sad costume for a role I was refusing to play. I took it off the hanger, folded it with precise, deliberate movements, and placed it back in my suitcase. Then I walked to the nightstand and picked up my phone. I looked at Nora's text message one last time, burning the words into my memory. It was my evidence, my proof of release. Then I held down the power button until the screen went black. The connection was severed, the cord was cut, but I was the one who held the scissors. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of lightness. The weight of their expectations, the constant, exhausting effort of earning their love, had all vanished. For the first time since I was a young girl, my future was a completely blank page. I had no idea what I was going to write on it, but I knew I would be the only author. The first hint of gray dawn began to filter through the curtains. In just a few hours, they would start to wonder where I was. They would call my room. They would call my dark, silent phone. They would expect to find the harmless, forgiving mother they had always known, waiting patiently to be told where to stand. But I wouldn't be there. As the sun rose on my son's wedding day, I zipped my suitcase shut. My mind was already 1,000 miles away from that wedding, from that hotel, from that life. I couldn't go back to my empty house, not yet. There was only one person on earth I could trust. My journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. and I knew exactly where I had to go. I didn't just pack my clothes. At the bottom of my suitcase, beneath a few sensible sweaters, was my old professional portfolio. It was a slim leather-bound book filled with sketches and photographs of my best work from over the years. Designs for intricate gowns, sharp suits, even a few theatrical costumes from a local play I'd worked on long ago. I hadn't opened it in a decade. My work, my identity, had become so wrapped up in being a mother and then a benefactor that I had forgotten the woman in those pages. I pulled it out and placed it in my handbag. Then I went to the cedar chest in my mind where I had stored the rejected waistcoat. In reality, it was in my main suitcase. I took it out. I folded it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. It was a masterpiece of my craft, and its rejection was the ultimate insult to my skill. It was proof of their blindness. I placed it carefully on top of my clothes in my carry-on bag. It was no longer a gift for him. It was a reminder for me. I walked to the hotel room door and paused. I took the keycard out of my pocket and laid it on the dresser next to the dark, silent phone, my farewell note. I opened the door, slipped out into the empty hallway, and pulled it shut behind me without a sound. I didn't look back. The hotel lobby was quiet in the pre-dawn hush, bathed in the soft, artificial light of a new day. The night clerk barely glanced up as I walked out the automatic doors and into the cool, damp morning air. I felt a sense of calm resolve as I called a taxi from a payphone at a nearby gas station. I wasn't running away. I was executing a strategic retreat. The ride to the bus station was silent. I watched the manicured lawns and grand entrance of the wedding venue fade into the distance. There was no sadness, no regret, just a quiet, humming sense of purpose. The Greyhound station was a world away from that place. It was real, gritty, and filled with people in transit, each one of them on a journey of their own. I felt anonymous here, and there was comfort in that. I walked up to the counter, the scuffed linoleum floor cool and solid beneath my feet. "One way to Chicago, please," I said. The words felt wonderful. They were the first words I had spoken that were entirely for me, about me, in a very long time. I paid with the last of the cash I had in my wallet, leaving just enough for a coffee and a sandwich. As I found my seat on the bus, the sun was beginning to climb into the sky. I knew the wedding day chaos was starting back at the hotel. Nora would be waking up, thinking about photographers and flower arrangements. Mark would be getting ready with his groomsmen. Soon, someone would notice I wasn't at the pre-ceremony breakfast. They would call my room, then they would call my phone. They would find it dead and useless. They would feel annoyance first, then confusion, then a rising tide of panic. Their perfect day, their perfect image was about to be disrupted. And for the first time, I wasn't there to smooth things over. The bus rumbled to life and pulled out of the station, leaving my old life behind in a cloud of diesel fumes. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched the world blur by. I thought of my niece Sarah, my late sister's daughter. I had helped raise her after my sister passed, and she had inherited all of her mother's fire and independence. Sarah ran a small, successful vintage clothing boutique in Chicago, a business she had built from nothing with her own 2 hands. She respected hard work. She valued skill. She would understand. Hours passed. States blended into one another. The landscape flattened and the sky seemed to get bigger. With every mile that passed, I felt the heavy cloak of obligation and expectation slipping from my shoulders. I was no longer Mark's mother, the harmless old woman, the family bank. I was just Alice, a woman on a bus with a portfolio, a waistcoat, and less than $50 to her name. When the bus finally pulled into the vast, noisy terminal in Chicago, I felt a tremor of fear. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a spark of excitement. I stepped off the bus into the chaotic symphony of the city, pulling my small suitcase behind me. The air was different here. It smelled like industry and possibility. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, so different from the quiet, tree-lined streets of my home. I had no real plan, no promise of a safe landing, just the hope that my niece would open her door to me. It wasn't much, but it was everything, and it was mine. The first 2 weeks in Chicago were a blur of quiet routine. My niece Sarah was a whirlwind of kindness. She set me up on the comfortable sofa bed in her small apartment above her vintage shop and refused to hear a word about me being a burden. I spent my days helping her in the store, steaming dresses, mending small tears in delicate fabrics, and trying not to think about the wedding that had happened without me, or the Italian honeymoon my son and his new wife were enjoying on the last of my money. I felt like a ghost floating through someone else's life. The pain had settled into a dull, constant ache. One evening, after we had closed the shop, Sarah sat me down with 2 cups of tea. "Alice," she said, her expression serious, "I love having you here, but you can't just be my assistant forever. You look like you're fading away. You have to fight back." "Fight back with what, honey?" I asked, my voice tired. "I have no money, no home to go back to right now. They've already won." Sarah's eyes flashed with the fire I remembered from her mother. "No, they haven't," she insisted. "They took your money, but they didn't take your skill. That's the one thing they can't touch. You have gold in those hands of yours. You just have to remember how to use it." I must have looked doubtful because she sighed and said, "Show me. Show me the waistcoat." I hesitated, then went to my suitcase and brought it out. In the warm light of Sarah's apartment, the dark wool seemed to glow. She took it from me with a reverence that made my throat tighten. She was a professional. She knew fabrics, construction, the language of clothing. She turned it over and over, her fingers tracing the seams. "This is breathtaking, Aunt Alice," she said, her voice soft with awe. "The hand-stitching on these buttonholes. This is couture-level work. This is art. To think they threw this away for some soulless designer label. They're fools." Hearing my work described as art by someone who knew, it was like a small, flickering pilot light being reignited inside of me. Sarah's eyes suddenly lit up with an idea. "Wait here," she said, and ran into the other room, coming back with her phone. "There's a woman, Diana Jenkins. She's a customer, a big-time costume designer. She's in town working on that new historical drama series, the one everyone's talking about. She is always in here complaining that she can't find real artisans anymore, people who understand how a garment is truly built." Before I could protest, Sarah was on the phone talking a mile a minute, her voice full of a confidence I hadn't felt in years. She hung up, a triumphant grin on her face. "She'll see you Thursday, 10 a.m. Bring the waistcoat." The next few days were a nervous blur. I felt foolish, dragging my dusty old portfolio into the modern world. But I went. The production office was a chaotic hive of activity. I felt ancient and out of place. Diana Jenkins was a sharp, busy woman with eyes that saw everything. She gave me a firm handshake and led me to a table covered in fabric swatches and sketches. She flipped through my portfolio with a polite professional interest. I could tell she was moderately impressed but not moved. My heart sank. This was a mistake. Then, as Sarah had instructed, I took out the waistcoat and laid it on the table. Diana stopped talking. She put down her pen. She reached out and touched the fabric. A complete silence fell over her as she picked it up. She examined every detail: the perfect lapel, the hand-stitched lining, the flawless buttonholes. She held it like it was something precious. "My God," she said, finally looking up at me. Her sharp eyes were no longer intimidating. They were full of genuine respect. "Where did you learn to do this? This is a dying art." I found my voice and told her about my career, my little shop, the decades of experience. As I spoke, I felt a flicker of the old pride returning. She told me about the show she was designing, a lavish period drama set in the Gilded Age, New York. They were struggling to create garments that looked authentic. "I can hire 100 people who can follow a pattern," she said, gesturing to the busy office. "I can't find anyone who has this soul in their work." And then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I don't just have some work for you, Alice. I need a lead tailor for my workshop. I need someone with your skill to manage the most intricate builds and teach my younger staff how it's done. The contract is for the full season, and the pay is substantial." The offer hung in the air so far beyond anything I could have dared to dream that I couldn't fully grasp it. A real job, a lead position, respected for my skill. It was validation. It was a lifeline. It was a resurrection. And as I sat there trying to process the words that were about to change my life, I want to ask you to do something that can help change mine. If you're inspired by my story of finding a new beginning, please take a moment to hit that like button. Every click helps this story reach someone else who might be feeling invisible. "So, Alice," Diana said, leaning forward with a smile, "what do you say? Are you ready to get back to work?" I walked out of that building an hour later, clutching a contract in my hand. The city noise didn't sound chaotic anymore. It sounded like a symphony. The intimidating skyscrapers looked like monuments to possibility. I wasn't Alice, the harmless, discarded mother. I was Alice, the lead tailor. I signed the papers that afternoon. My hand was steady. My signature was firm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't signing something away. I was signing on to my own future. My son and his wife were probably just getting back from their honeymoon, blissfully unaware, thinking their plan had worked perfectly. They had no idea I was already building a new world without them in it, and it was going to be more beautiful than anything they could ever imagine. My first few weeks on the job were a baptism by fire. The workshop was a whirlwind of energy, filled with the hum of sewing machines, the scent of hot irons on wool, and the vibrant chatter of creative people. I was given a corner office with a huge cutting table and a window that looked out over the city. I worked 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, and I loved every second of it. I fell into bed each night with a pleasant ache in my bones, my mind too full of patterns and period details to have room for anything else. I was building something real, and it was exhilarating. Meanwhile, as I was rediscovering a part of myself I thought was long dead, Mark and Nora were returning from their 2-week fantasy in Italy. I can only imagine the scene. They would have come back to their brand-new mortgage-to-the-hilt apartment, tanned and tired and full of stories. The real world would have greeted them in the form of a mountain of bills in the mailbox. As I learned later from my cousin, the honeymoon glow faded the moment the first credit card statement arrived. The wedding, the trip, their entire lifestyle, it had all been financed on the assumption of a steady, unending supply of cash from me. Now the well was dry, and the collectors were thirsty. I'm sure the conversation was casual at first. Nora, unpacking a ridiculously expensive leather handbag, would have said, "The first mortgage payment is due next week. Just call your mom. Ask her for a small loan to get us through the month." For them this was normal, an inconvenience to be outsourced to me. It was a transaction, simple as that. So Mark, ever the obedient son, picked up the phone to make a withdrawal. But this time, the bank was closed. My old phone, the one I'd left on the hotel dresser, was sitting in a lost and found box. The calls went straight to a voicemail box that was already full. His texts went unanswered into the digital void. At first I'm told he was just annoyed. "She's probably still sulking about the wedding," he complained to Nora. "She'll get over it. She always does." But after a few more days of silence, with the payment due date looming, Nora's patience wore thin. "Mark, this is ridiculous," she would have snapped. "Stop calling and go over there, get the checkbook, and fix this." So he drove to my house. He used the key I gave him when he was a teenager, the one that was supposed to be for emergencies. He walked in expecting to find me in the garden or humming away in my sewing room, ready to be placated with a half-hearted apology before writing a check. Instead, he found only silence. He walked through the quiet rooms. The house was spotless. There was no dust, no sign of neglect, but there was also no sign of life. No coffee pot on the warmer, no newspaper on the table, no half-finished project in my sewing room. My car was gone from the garage. He looked for a note on the kitchen counter. There was nothing. That was when the annoyance finally curdled into a cold, sharp dread. He called Nora, his voice tight with a panicky confusion he couldn't hide. "She's gone. Everything's here, but she's just gone." Nora's response, as it was relayed to me, was not, "Oh my God, is she okay?" It was, "What do you mean gone? Where are her bank statements? Is her purse there? Did she leave a note for anyone?" Her concern was purely logistical. An asset had gone missing. Their panic escalated. They began calling distant relatives, old neighbors, anyone who might have spoken to me. Most knew nothing. But one of my cousins, the one Sarah had already spoken to, gave them a small, vague breadcrumb. "Oh, I think she mentioned wanting to visit Sarah in Chicago for a little while." While they were frantically trying to piece together my trail, I was a world away having dinner with Sarah and 2 of my new colleagues from the workshop. I was laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that came from the belly. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The contrast was a universe-wide. They were consumed by my absence while I was blissfully unaware, consumed by my new life. I heard about the voicemails later, dozens of them, a chaotic symphony of their meltdown. Mark's messages swung wildly from angry to pleading. "Mom, where are you? You can't just disappear. Nora and I are worried sick." And then, "Mom, seriously, I need to talk to you. The bank just called."
"Call me back. They weren't worried about me."
They were worried about themselves. Their plan had been to keep me in the background, a silent, harmless source of funding. They had never planned for what would happen if the background simply walked away, taking the bank with it. They were adrift and they were beginning to sink. It was another 2 months before I saw him. By then, the rhythm of my new life felt like my own. I had moved into a small, sunny apartment just a short train ride from the studio. It was the first place that had ever been entirely mine, decorated not for a family, but for me. I had made friends at work. We would get dinner after a long day, talking about fabrics and films, our lives weaving together in a new and comfortable pattern. I was happy. Sarah had warned me that Mark was getting desperate. He had somehow found her shop's number and had been calling constantly. She was a loyal gatekeeper, telling him firmly that I would contact him if and when I was ready. But he wasn't a man who took no for an answer. Not when he wanted something. He drove to Chicago. He showed up at Sarah's boutique demanding to know where I was. She told him to leave. He waited across the street for hours like a private detective in a bad movie. Eventually, his pathetic stakeout paid off. He saw Sarah's assistant leave with a delivery box addressed to the production studio and followed her. He found me in the heart of my new world. The workshop was humming with its usual creative chaos. I was on a platform fitting a heavy velvet gown onto an actress, my mouth full of pins, my brow furrowed in concentration. My assistants were around me, handing me shears, taking notes. In that moment, I was completely in my element. I was respected. I was in charge. Someone said my name, and I turned, and there he was, standing just inside the workshop doors, looking lost and out of place. He looked thinner, and the expensive suit he wore was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. He looked like a man whose world was falling apart. He started walking towards me, his face a storm of anger and relief. "Mom, there you are!" His voice was too loud for the focused quiet of the room. "I've been going out of my mind. You just disappear without a word? What were you thinking?" I calmly took the pins from my mouth and handed my notepad to my assistant. "Take 5, everyone," I said, my voice even. The actress secured off the platform, and my team tactfully moved away, pretending to be busy with other things. I stepped down to face my son. "I wasn't thinking," I said simply. I was seeing for the first time. His anger faltered, replaced by the familiar whine of manipulation. "Seeing what? Mom, this has to stop." It was a wedding. People were stressed. If you were upset, you should have said something. You can't just abandon your family. "My family?" I asked, and the question was genuine. "My family is my niece who gave me a place to stay without asking for anything in return. My family is the people in this room who value what I can do, not what I can give them." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's not fair. We need you. I need you. You have to come home." I looked at him, at this man who was my son but who felt like a stranger, and I felt no anger, no hatred. All I felt was a great calm, quiet finality. The pain was gone, and in its place was the hard, clear truth. "You're right," I said softly. "You do need something, but it isn't me. It's my bank account. It's my home. It's my willingness to put your life ahead of my own. And all of those things are no longer available to you." "So this is it," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "You're throwing away your whole family over a stupid wedding toast." It was never about the toast, Mark. It was about the text message. The one that called me harmless. The one that laid out the plan to cut me off after you had taken the last of my money. His face went pale. He had no idea I knew. The silence stretched between us, and in that silence, I delivered the final quiet blow. "At your wedding," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You stood up and you chose your mother. I accept your choice. And now I am making mine. I am choosing me." As the words left my mouth, I felt a wave of peace so profound it almost brought me to my knees. The last chain had broken. I was finally completely free. If you've ever had to find the strength to draw a line in the sand and stand up for yourself, I would be so honored if you shared a little of your story in the comments. We all draw strength from each other. Mark just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. All of his weapons, the guilt, the anger, the feigned concern, were useless. They simply bounced off the serene, unreachable wall of my new reality. He looked around the workshop at the incredible world I was now a part of, and I saw the dawning realization in his eyes. He had no power here. This was my life, and he was no longer the center of it. He deflated. The anger and fight just seemed to drain out of him, leaving a slumped, defeated man in a rumpled suit. He gave one last desperate look at me, hoping to see a flicker of the old, forgiving mother. He found nothing. Without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, a small figure disappearing into the bright, busy world I now called home. And I felt no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. I just felt a quiet sadness for the son I had lost, and a deep, powerful gratitude for the woman I was finally becoming. Nearly a year went by, a year of hard work, new friendships, and quiet, steady healing. The show I was working on had finally aired, and to everyone's delight, it was a massive success. The critics praised the acting and the writing, but they raved about the costumes, calling them a character in their own right. Seeing my creations on screen, bringing a historical world to life, filled me with a sense of pride I hadn't felt in decades. I wasn't just a mother or a widow or a seamstress. I was an artist. One afternoon, I got a phone call from Sarah. Her voice was buzzing with an energy that meant she had news. "Aunt Alice, you need to sit down," she said, practically vibrating through the phone. "Our cousin Patty just called me. She has all the gossip from back home about Mark and Nora." I had trained myself not to think about them, to keep my focus on my own life. But I was human. I took a breath and said, "Okay, honey, I'm sitting." The story that tumbled out of her was one of slow, inevitable collapse. Their carefully constructed world, built on my money and their arrogance, had crumbled. Without my constant cash infusions, they couldn't sustain their lifestyle. The first thing to go was the expensive car. It was repossessed in the middle of the night, Patty had said, much to the delight of their neighbors. Next went the apartment. After missing rent for 3 months, they were evicted. They were now living in a cramped one-bedroom rental on the noisy side of town, the kind of place Nora would have turned her nose up at just a year ago. And the final, most delicious piece of poetic justice was Nora herself. To make ends meet, she had been forced to get a second job. She was working evenings and weekends at a cosmetics counter in the mall, the very place her wealthy friends shopped. Sarah said Patty had heard from someone who saw her there, wearing a polyester uniform and a fake smile, trying to sell lipstick to the same women she had once tried so desperately to impress. But the real blow to her pride, Sarah told me, came from an unexpected source, me. A popular entertainment magazine had run a feature on the breakout artisans of television, and there was a whole section on our show's costume design. There was a large, beautifully shot photograph of me in the workshop, smiling, surrounded by my team. The article called me a master tailor and praised my uncompromising commitment to authenticity. The article was shared thousands of times online. It had inevitably made its way back to my hometown, onto the social media feeds of Nora's entire social circle. The same people who had attended the wedding where I was meant to be an invisible embarrassment now saw me celebrated as a respected artist. The perfect image Nora had tried to build by erasing me had been completely shattered by my success. "And what about Mark?" I asked, my voice quiet. Sarah's tone softened. "Patty said he's miserable. He tried calling our cousin, asking for your new number. She said he sounded broken. He kept saying he'd made a terrible mistake and just wanted to talk to his mom." I was silent for a moment, processing it all. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a bitter taste of, "I told you so," but I didn't. I just felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were hearing a story about people I used to know a long, long time ago. Their downfall didn't bring me joy. My peace had already been found, not in their failure, but in my own success. "He knows where I work," I said finally. "If he truly wanted to apologize, he could find me. But he doesn't want forgiveness, Sarah. He wants a solution. He wants me to come back and fix his life, and my fixing days are over." We hung up a few minutes later, and I walked over to the window of my small, sunny apartment. I looked out at the bustling Chicago streets. Their story was one of shrinking, of consequences closing in on them, of a world getting smaller and grayer. They were trapped in the mess they had made. My story was the opposite. My world had opened up, becoming bigger, brighter, and more full of promise. With every passing day, their book was closing. Mine felt like it had just begun. It's funny how a place can stay the same, but feel completely different. A year and a half after I left, I decided to spend a weekend at my old house in Ohio. I had kept it, paying the bills from my new salary. I wasn't ready to let it go, but I wasn't sure what it would feel like to be back. I walked through the familiar rooms, half expecting to feel the ghosts of the past, the ache of old wounds, but there was nothing. The house was just a house again. A quiet, peaceful space that held my memories, but no longer held my pain. The silence wasn't lonely. It was serene. I spent the morning in my garden, pulling weeds and tending to the roses my husband had planted so many years ago. My hands, which had grown so accustomed to the feel of fine fabrics, remembered the rhythm of the earth. I felt grounded, whole. Later I went into my sewing room. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the thousands of tiny dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, I thought about the text message that had changed my life. The memory was no longer sharp and painful. It was like a scar, a smooth, pale reminder of a wound that had long since healed. In a strange way, I was grateful for it. It was the cold, hard truth that had finally set me free. I sat down at my sewing machine, not to work on a deadline, but for the simple joy of it. I pulled out a beautiful piece of raw silk, the color of a summer dawn, and began to sketch a design. It wasn't for a client or a show. It was just for me, an idea that wanted to be born. I thought about Mark and Nora. I had heard nothing more about them, and I had not tried to. I hoped they found some kind of peace, but their story was no longer mine to follow. I had learned that my greatest responsibility was not to fix their lives, but to build my own. My love for my son had not been wrong, but my understanding of love had been incomplete. I thought love meant endless sacrifice. I now knew that true love cannot exist without respect, and respect has to start with yourself. The greatest lesson of this last year has been this: your value is not determined by how useful you are to others. It is inherent. It is absolute. Demanding to be treated with dignity is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of survival, and it is never ever too late to start over. Today, my peace is my greatest wealth, and my freedom is my most prized possession. I built a new life, not from bricks and mortar, but from the quiet realization that I was worthy of one. My deepest wish is that anyone watching this who feels invisible or taken for granted knows that your story is not over. If my journey has meant something to you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every new member helps this community become a stronger voice, a brighter beacon for others who are learning to find their own way. Let's help each other grow. As I sat there in my quiet, sunlit room, I felt a smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of victory or vindication. It was a smile of pure, simple contentment. The past was a story I had read. The future was a story I was still writing. And for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that it was going to have a beautiful ending. My hands, once tired from a lifetime of giving, were now creating a world just for me. And it was more wonderful than I had ever dared to dream.